you did the method because you had some very serious symptoms that you were living with when I first met you. And then your mum decided to learn it as well. So what I thought would be good is if you give us sort of short summary of your experience and then how the process went for your mother.
I come from this farming background, and the old manager on the farm told me that I'd been on the sprayer as a child with my father. And in those days, there was no cab. There was no protective clothing. My father had a lot of health problems, which I think were related to chemical exposure. And I had childhood epilepsy and ear, nose and throat problems. I went deaf when I was 6. I don't know whether these kind of conditions were connected to the insecticide, herbicide, fungicide exposure. I don't know. And of course, I'm too young to judge how much chemical I was exposed to, but I certainly was exposed as a child. But the thing that really pushed me over the edge was when I was 39, I had a woodworm treatment, insecticide treatment done on a house I was renovating. And then my health declined immediately. I was running around like a fly, the whole nervous system wired. And for about a week or so, and then I collapsed into quite extreme, very extreme chronic fatigue and hypersensitivity to virtually all chemicals. I went through this domino effect of strong chemicals, and then weaker and weaker and weaker ones would trigger me till eventually I couldn't even use fairy liquid. That would be enough to have my lungs gripping and me rushing to the toilet because it would affect my gut. And then later on, the domino effect of sensitivity arrived at electrical signals, pulsed electrical signals. So one day I put my phone to my ear and it was like a skewer going through my brain. And then I couldn't use any kind of mobile phone. I had been quite a big user prior to being exposed in 2002. And then I couldn't use a mobile phone for the next 10 years or so until I got to the potato method. So yes, I spent 10 years then trying virtually every health modality I could find. I used what little I had in my brain, because my brain was very affected by these chemicals, but what mental energy I had, I put to reading scientific papers, reading articles, reading books on health, studied everything, and this smorgasbord of modalities. I tried just about anything that anyone vaguely intelligent said, try this, I would try it. I spent a lot of money and an awful lot of time and an awful lot of energy, because anybody who knows what it's like to try all these diet remedies and herbal remedies and whatever else it might be knows it takes an awful lot of time and energy when you have very little of those things.
Yeah.
It was 2011, I met someone on a shiatsu course who said she'd done this potato method. It transformed her health. I knew she wasn't trying to sell me anything. She was a very agreeable and trustworthy person. And so I rang you and said, I'd like to try this. And a week or two later, I was on the beginner's course with you and Christopher Drake. And almost immediately, I noticed an improvement in my health. What then ensued was a year of extremely hard work, of pushing my pauses, doing almost, I think my record was 2 minutes 25 breath hold. And I knew, people say, oh, it's hard work, the potato method, which it is. But because you get the results, the motivation is in the method. So I got the motivation to really try hard at this because I could see it was the first thing that made any real difference. I went through one layer of appalling cleansing after another. But at the end of a year, I remember Vladimir, who was looking after me at that point, because my cleansing got so severe. During that cleanse at the year point, which was a 6-week cleanse, I couldn't stand up out of a chair. I was peeing in a washing up bucket. It was quite grim. But at a certain point, Vladimir got me to do some steps when I could barely even sit upright in front of a computer. And he said at the end of it, these prophetic words, "You've done it. That's it." And at the time it was like, that's it? That's what? I feel absolutely horrendous. I'm non-functional, but he was absolutely right. From that point on, the blue skies appeared, the clouds moved away. And yes, I carried on for another 5 years having cleansers, but they got less and less severe as the years went on, and my health got better and better. And I would say I was a functional human being from 1 year into the Pateka method. After another 4 years, shall we say, roughly, I mean, you can't time it exactly, I was a fully functioning human being with a good state of health, a good state of mind, able to take on projects, able to have a social life, able even to do things that I never thought I'd be able to do again, have a beer, for example, drink alcohol, fully participate in life, and even begin to be able to use a mobile phone again. I mean, I never hold it to my ear anymore, but I can hold it like this. There was a time when I couldn't even sit on a bus because people would be using mobile phones. Yeah. Even if I was 2 or 3 meters away from them, I could feel it. And sometimes in the early, I would try and put a mobile phone in front of me on a chair and speak to it from a distance. And even that was too much. But, now I can hold a mobile phone, use a mobile phone, no problem. Am I where I was before I was exposed to nerve agent? Because that's what insecticide is. It's a nerve agent. Maybe not. But I would say I'm 80, 90% of what I would be now by the age of 60, which is what I am. I'm pretty damn close. And there's only one factor, really, that I would say has made that difference, and it's the Pateka method. Yes, I'm interested in diet. I do eat a good diet. I think those things are important. I do get exercise. I think that's important. I do breathe fresh air when I can and get sunlight. All important. But the key, the difference was made only by breath control. And I see this every day. I still practice daily. I get up in the morning, I've just woken up. I feel a bit groggy. I practice. My brain switches on. My body feels relaxed. I can work, I can function. So I will do the Pateka method to the end of my days because there's no substitute as a basis, as the primary pillar. I'm not going to say a primary pillar, I'd say the primary pillar for maintaining good health, both physically, but also mentally and emotionally. It's the Pateka method. Everything else is secondary. I'm not saying they're not important, but they're secondary.
Your mum at some point saw the results in you, and she had a problem. She started to...
Yeah, this was very interesting. My mother's a very conservative, old-fashioned English lady brought up before the Second World War. She believes in all authority and certainly in doctors. But interestingly, as a child, she was always a bit suspicious of doctors who push drugs. We weren't given many pills when we were children. So there was something in her mind that was a little bit, she believed in nature and leaving things to its course. But up until the age of 80, this was a woman who'd hardly had a day's illness. And she had no time for illness. If you spoke to her about illness, she wasn't interested. And she used to find her friends who spoke about illness very boring. Yeah. And so up to the age of 80, everybody would say to her, Margaret, you're amazing. She would be up at 6 o'clock in the morning, going across the field with her Labradors and, getting her fresh air and sunlight, which is what she thought was and eating, good food. This is what she thought was the basis of health. And of course, there's some truth in that. But then everything changed during her 80th year. She developed arthritis of the spine, and she very quickly started to lose the use of her lower extremities, her limbs, her legs. And it went to a Zimmer frame, and then it was becoming more and more to a wheelchair. And then one day I just almost passingly said to her, have you thought of the Pateka method? And I assumed she'd say, I'm not doing anything alternative. I thought that's what she would say. But she said, no, I'll do that. I'll learn that. And I said, really? She said, yes. I saw what it did for you. You know, you were so ill and you're so much better. And I saw you doing this breathing practice and you talked about it, and it sounds, well, I can't think of anything else that helped. So she did it. And Christopher Drake trained her. And, you know, I did the bits in between during the day, but Christopher saw her for the 5 days. And she learned the method. She wasn't a very good student. There were certain principles she never understood. She never understood the idea of pushing pauses. Once she got to 60 seconds, she, in her own understanding, thought that's what she has to do every day. And she was a creature of habit, which is a good thing and a bad thing. But it meant that for the rest of her life, for the next 10 years, she practiced 3 times a day, before breakfast, before lunch, before bed. And she did 60 seconds 3 times. And, you know, I taught her in those early days that she had to keep a journal, she had to keep a notebook and keep her scores. And she kept those scores, and all the numbers were the same for the next 10 years. So 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60. And I tried to explain to her there's no point in keeping scores if the numbers are never going to change. But her attitude was, you told me to keep scores, I will keep scores. And so all I can say about my mother's practice is that it was regular and it was persistent, and she never stopped. And the thing that I noticed, and of course I was looking, and I tried to explain to my sisters, and I'm not sure they ever got it, is that my mother's deterioration in her condition was halted, or it was slowed down to such a point that it was almost imperceptible. During the first months of her, before she did the Pateka method, of her diagnosis of arthritis of the spine, you could almost see her deterioration by the day. You know, she went from walking to walking not very well, to Zimmer frame, to wheelchair. It was bang, 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 bang. You know, and if I went to see her for a week, by the end of the week, she would be worse than she was at the beginning of the week, because I used to go and live with her and help out, you know. But once she started doing the method, it leveled out. The deterioration leveled out. And as I say, it wasn't good practice she was doing, but it was regular. And then it slowed down to the point that you could hardly perceive it. And she had another 10 years of what she would say was quality of life. Yes, she wasn't walking through the fields anymore. She wasn't striding towards the horizon, but she was, as she would put it, comfortable. She was able to do whatever she did, which was read books on, I don't know, biographies on old 1940s film stars or members of the aristocracy, or farming books, or she'd watch her favorite daytime TV, and she enjoyed life. And most of all, she chatted with her friends, which she loved doing. One thing I ought to say is it wasn't just that arthritis of the spine, the symptoms from that were halted or reduced to a point that they were imperceptible, but also what my mother noticed was a huge benefit in her mental and, most importantly, her emotional state. She would say to me, and she said it a few times, sometimes I wake up in the morning and think, well, I'm old and I'm paralyzed. What's the point? And she said, I would then do my practice. And as soon as my practice would be over, it would be as if the clouds had moved. And I would think to myself, well, I'm going to enjoy my day. She noticed very clearly, it was absolutely plain to her, that if she reduced her breathing significantly, her state of mind would move from one of negativity and hopelessness to one of clarity, and I can manage my life and I'm going to enjoy my life. The shift was night and day to her in terms of her emotional state, from what's the point to I'm going to enjoy my day. She became herself, because my mother was naturally a very positive person. Of course, her state would mitigate against that positivity, but the Pateka method gave her herself back, her real personality. And I would say the same for myself. When I was ill, I became this negative, moaning, dreary, hopeless, depressed. What's the point? Yeah. I'd rather be dead. Why was I born? All these terrible ideas. But once my control pause is up and my breathing is reduced, I'm someone who loves life, who's full of ideas, who has appetite for action and adventure and you know, a joyful experience of life. That's what the Pateka method, you know, reduced breathing, increased carbon dioxide does for people. It's not that my mother or myself are unique. That is pretty much everybody's experience from what I observe.
Yeah.
They feel themselves again.
Yeah.
And everybody's idea of themselves is someone who loves life.
Yeah. Joy.
Yeah, depression is not a natural state.
No.
Anxiety is not a natural state. These are low control pause, high toxicity, and those two things go together. These are low control pause, high toxicity states. They are unnatural. And it coincides with a low control pause, deep breathing, lack of carbon dioxide. Both of those things will be reversed by the Pateka method. It will cause the immune system to fire up, remove the toxicity, and at the same time, it will raise your carbon dioxide levels, reduce your breathing, and anxiety and depression will disappear as if they were never there, as if you will not even remember that you felt anxiety and depression. It will be as if the sun rises and the night disappears. Are you thinking about the night in the day? No, you are not. Are you thinking about depression and anxiety when you feel relaxed and cheerful? No, you're not. It's the same process.
Yeah. It's quite funny, really, because you can feel a bit groggy at times, and then you just do a few pauses. And you wonder what that was all about. Just goes.
Well, you don't even wonder. That's the irony, is you forget. You know, I get up some mornings and I think, oh God, you know, a bit stiff and a bit like, oh God, can I face all the things I've got to do today? And then I'm marching around the room because for me now, after all these years of doing the Pateka method, for my hand just to drop over my nose and to start marching around the room is almost as if I would have to tell myself not to do it. You know, it's not an effort anymore because I just automatically do it. But, you know, I'll go down into the kitchen and my hand will drop on my nose. I start marching around. And before you know it, I've done 120 steps or whatever. And then I feel that opening of all the blood vessels because I control my breathing after I've taken my hand off my nose. I can feel that whoosh, 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 which at one time I might have thought was a bit disturbing. But I now know that's the point. When the action happens, that's when the carbon dioxides hit the level where it dilates the blood vessels. The blood is now, and the oxygen and everything is now getting to my brain cells. It's getting to every organ in my body. And then I just sit and relax in the reduced breathing and control the breath. And then, you know what? It's like, great, let's start my day. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And I'm not thinking about being achy or stiff or not wanting to face my issues. We've all got, life is problematic by nature. The difference is, can you handle the problems?
Yeah.
Can you manage the problems? Or do you feel overwhelmed by them? Well, once you raise carbon dioxide, you can manage them as a general rule.
Yeah.
You know, then you can enjoy your life, because if you can manage what's coming at you, then life is more of a play. You're part of it.
Yeah.
Opposed to being drowned by it, which is what happens if your breathing is deep and you are highly toxic. And you're under the cosh all the time then, and life is not a game, it's not a play, it's not an enjoyable thing.
It's an endurance.
Yeah, it's suffering, it's endurance. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Joe. Lots of interesting points for people to consider. It's just good to hear people's stories. It's very inspiring, and it's very inspiring that it helps people right across the age group.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't matter what your age is. Yes, it's true, young people can get full recovery. An old person probably can't, and a middle-aged person neither may be able to achieve perfect health. But the difference is light and day. So if you're my age now or something and just starting out on this, what can you achieve? Well, an enormous amount.
Enormous.
You can achieve enormous.
Yeah, it's significant. Whereas if you really put your back into it as a young person, you can become quite a specimen. You can go to your natural template, and the method will rebuild your body.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, a young person could go from being someone who's lethargical, depressed, irritable. I mean, I used to see this with the boy I raised, Lucas. He'd come back from school, and he's Dutch, so in Holland they have very strict rules on what you can put in his lunch pack. So he probably wouldn't want to eat in the morning. He'd just got up and had to get off to school early. He'd hardly eat anything, and then at lunch he'd have almost nothing. And he'd come back, and after school he'd be straight off to football. By the time he got back, he'd be irritable, tired, or whatever. You'd give him a little bit of food, get him to do a bit of breathing, and he'd be flying around and relaxed and cheerful. What we noticed with him, if he was irritable, if he was grouchy, we'd just get him to do some practice, and he would calm down. He'd become smiley. He'd become this lovely spirit that he was, this very beautiful personality. You could see it again night and day. He would be an irritable, unfriendly, uncooperative child, and he would turn to just a few breath holds if we could get him to do it, and he usually would do it if we asked him to. He would be relaxed, cheerful, loving, warm, creative, expansive. He would be a different child. He'd be the child that he was. This is the point, is the Pateka method gives you back to yourself, gives you back yourself to yourself, if that makes any sense. The person you like about yourself. And if we think of ourselves, obviously we have we see the best in ourselves. And when we are ill, that seems like a distant memory. Who was that person that I used to love? Well, that you can have that person back at any age. I mean, that was the thing. Maybe you can't get all of your serious illnesses reversed. You can do a lot, but you can, at the very least, rediscover your self-worth. You're able to value yourself and see the person that you used to be.
You can firstly start feeling comfortable in your body, and that comes back quite quickly.
You'll notice that within the beginner's course, right at the beginning, that first moment when you've got enough carbon dioxide in that the organism can relax. That is such a revelation. I saw this with many students. They'd, day 1, day 2, sometimes they wouldn't feel anything. Some would, a lot would even on the first day. But certainly by day 3, if they actually did the practice, you'd see their eyes open and sparkle. You'd see their face relax. They would suddenly look younger. And they would often say things like, God, I haven't felt this relaxed for years. Just to be at ease in the body, which then also, of course, means at ease in the world, at ease in their life, at ease in their relationship, at ease with their children, at ease with their job, or whatever it is, their situation. Once you're at ease in your body, and then you're also at ease in your mind, then the outside world becomes something you can be at ease with. So yeah, you would see that pretty much everybody. It's very rare, and only those who didn't actually practice, I would say. But everybody who practices, everybody, I think I can confidently say, will have that experience within the first 5 days if they do what they're instructed. So I'm always very suspicious if anyone got to the end of the week and said, oh, they didn't feel anything. It'd be very rare, but if they did, you'd always know that they hadn't actually done the practice. They hadn't done it. They might tell you they did, but they didn't. And you check up on them and you find that actually they didn't really. And then you get them to practice, and then they get the effect. Cause and effect.
Yeah. It's a brilliant life tool.
Oh gosh, I mean, if I hadn't, this often occurs to me. If I hadn't have found the Pateka method in 2011, I don't think I'd be alive now.
No, nor would I.
I'd either would have died from the deterioration in my condition, because you don't get better when you have chronic illness. If you don't do anything, if you don't, well, the one thing that will stop and reverse it is raising carbon dioxide. If you don't do that, you will lose carbon dioxide. You will breathe progressively deeper. and your condition will comport with that. Your condition will get worse as your breathing deepens. You will get worse. Everybody knows this who's chronically ill. You don't get better, you deteriorate. And I would have either got to the point that the symptoms of the disease would have killed me, or I would have not been able to bear my condition, and I would have killed myself. And the level of depression would have, and anxiety, which comes with, and depression and anxiety, they come together, seems to me, would have taken me to the point where I wouldn't have been able to bear it anymore.
Yeah,
so,
you
yes.
suffered a lot. I know you suffered a lot. It was horrendous. And I didn't realize how much I was suffering. I got to the point where I knew that it was dangerous. I was making a lot of mistakes, and I was not able to function very long each day. And I was just kind of in a state of, this has to change. I have to find something to get me out of this. That's all I could think. Screaming out there, just send me somebody to help, because I have to get out of this.
Yeah.
There was nothing else. There was nowhere to go.
It's interesting. It was a Buddhist monk that brought you on to Christopher. He taught Buddhist monks, and which is kind of also very interesting. Breath.
Well, I mean, the thing was is that it didn't come to my mind to even think about ending my life. I had to actually stay alive. That wasn't an issue. I had to stay alive. The problem was is I couldn't function.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was getting serious.
Yeah, I mean, I remember waking up, it's similar, I think, thing to what you're saying. I remember waking up in the morning and thinking I can't get out of bed.
Well, I couldn't. I didn't know whether I said things or not. I didn't know how to sort things anymore. I couldn't organize things because I was just muddling everything up. Things were becoming a muddle.
Yeah.
Main dysfunction was just going. It was awful.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think, I mean, I did have all mental fatigue, but I think it was the physical fatigue that got me the most. I couldn't lift my body out of the bed. And then I remember standing, picking up the toothbrush and just thinking, I haven't got the energy to brush my teeth. The brush would feel so heavy and my hand would feel so weak. And I think, if I can't even brush my teeth, how on earth can I manage my life? And I remember in the particularly early days, soon after I was poisoned, I would walk into town. I was living up in Lancaster at the time, and I would slowly walk into town, because I'm always someone who's been very physical. I was really into sport when I was younger. Physical theatre I did, which is like almost like ballet training. It's so full on, 3 hours of absolute full on, on your tiptoes and, holding positions. I'm used to being very physical. So after I got poisoned, I continued to try and be physical. It didn't work anymore. And I used to sort of drag myself into town, but be so fatigued that I'd sort of collapse on a bench on the side of the road and wouldn't be able to get home. And I'd sit there for hours, just sort of slumped. And I'm sure people walking past me would have thought, well, he's a druggie or a drunk. And if anyone spoke to me, I was so tired, I wouldn't be able to control my lips. I didn't have the strength to mouth the words. So I'd have slurred voice. And I would just wait and wait and wait. And I did notice there was a pattern to my fatigue, is I'd wake up in the morning, not feel so great, but then sort of pick up a bit as I moved my body around. I now realize just moving was raising my carbon dioxide. And I would get to, sort of, 8 o'clock in the morning, think, oh, my day's going to be okay. I'm all right. I'm functioning. And then about 9, almost like clockwork, it would just go off a cliff. And I'd be like, and I'd be like that for the rest of the day. And then at about 6, it was just, there was a bit of a cycle when I'd pick up a bit. So I remember this particular day when I was sat on this park bench in Lancaster. I sat for hours and hours and hours. I couldn't move. I just couldn't move. And I was living alone at the time. There was nobody to help me. And then eventually I just got a bit of strength in my body and finally was able to sort of get myself onto my feet, and then shuffle very, very slowly, half a mile home or however far it was, and then slump into a chair. That was my life. At the age of 39, which, I say I went from being someone, I was often almost criticized for being hyperactive when I was young. I had so much energy, mental and physical. So to go from that, someone who just was bursting with ideas, bursting with enthusiasm, and people would often say, "Oh, you're too much, Joe. You're too much. Give me a break." I went from that to being the guy who couldn't speak, couldn't move, was spent all day either in bed or in a chair, and slept most of the time. There was just no energy to stay awake. Well, now I function like a normal person. I wouldn't say I'm bursting with energy, but I've got enough to do what I need to do.
Well, you've done a lot in the last 10 years. No, it's more actually, isn't it? It's 12 or 13 years that we've known each other.
It's 12 years, yeah. 2011. Yeah. Gone through a lot of stages. Students often say to me, am I going to have to do this forever? And the truthful answer is yes. But that's not really the answer, because that leads to a misconception. Yes, you will have to do it forever if you want to maintain your good health. But the point is, you won't mind. It will be part of your lifestyle. I don't resent having to practice these days. If I need to practice, I'd practice. And I do it automatically as well. If I go and make a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, I pour the water on the tea bag, and I'm just off around the room doing a pause without even thinking. I say, okay, put the milk in, may do another one. And then I go and sit back at my computer or do whatever I'm going to do. So it becomes so much, a bit like for my mother, for her, she practiced 3 times a day. She didn't resent it at all. It's just like, oh, it's that time again. Her helper would say, lunch is ready, Margaret. Are you going to practice? Oh, yes. Because, my mother's helper would know that's what she always did. And she'd spend 10 or 15 minutes, whatever, practicing. And then she'd have her lunch. And it would be the same at tea time. It would be saying, oh, bedtime. Oh, practice. You just do it. Like brushing your teeth. I mean, I don't think anybody goes, whoa, can't wait to brush my teeth. But you just do it because you've always done it. Yeah. It's not an issue.
I think that when people ask that question, they've usually got a control pause that's quite low, whereas we're seeing it from the perspective of having a control pause above 35 seconds, which is a completely different situation. Yeah. That job of getting it to 35 seconds
is huge.
It's huge.
Yes, that job entails a lot of suffering. I mean, this is one of the ironies that students have to put up with, is they come to the Taker method because they're suffering. And then we ask them to do something that gives another level of suffering. And sometimes that just seems almost unfair, like they've almost been tricked or something. But of course, we never deny that fact. We tell them so they know it's coming. But the point is, it's a different kind of suffering, because the suffering when you are chronically ill, is going nowhere.
Yeah.
The suffering you do, holding your breath, which of course you don't want to do, the control pause has got so low, the part of your brain, the respiratory center, which is controlling that, fights like mad. It doesn't want you to reverse this condition. It doesn't want you to get used to having healthy levels of carbon dioxide again. So it will do everything to go, this is terrible, stop doing this. But I mean, that's the main job of a practitioner, is to encourage, to wangle, to whatever it takes
to keep going.
To keep that person practicing. Because we know from, 30, 40, 50 years of experience that anyone who keeps practicing gets the result. Vladimir puts it very well. He said, we're asking you to suffer a little now so that you will suffer a lot less later on. And that's how it works. You suffer to do this. And then, of course, you suffer the cleansing. If you are diligent and push your pauses, then the body will start doing what you're asking it to do, which is clean itself. So all that toxicity that's been hidden away in your body fat will suddenly hit your blood. It'll be in your brain. You'll feel all the effects of being poisoned, which is awful, but it will pass. It will either pass in minutes, hours, days, or in my case, even weeks, if it's super strong chemicals like insecticide, which is nerve agent. When that stuff hits your body, there's a reason why your body never dealt with it, because it can't. Certainly if it hasn't got enough carbon dioxide, it can't deal with it. It will do anything to avoid dealing with it. So suddenly now you're dealing with insecticide poisoning. There were times when my cleansing felt like it did when I was first poisoned, hardly surprisingly.
Sure.
I'm being re-poisoned as it's passing through my liver and out of my body. But the difference this time is, somewhere while you are cleansing, that this is going in the right direction. This is going to resolution. It's not just a suffering that's going to go on forever. It will stop and you will feel better. And your body will remove layer after layer after layer. And at every stage, your control pause goes up and you feel a similar level of improvement in your symptoms.
Yeah.
Your control pause goes up, you feel better. Control pause goes up, you feel better. That's how it works, layer by layer. But every time you go up a step, you have to go through this feeling worse and then better. So it's one step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward. But the point is, you learn after a while that it's always forward. Ultimately, it's always upwards. The general trajectory is up and forwards. That in itself is massively inspiring for someone who's dealt with chronic fatigue for years, because the trajectory has always been down.
Yeah.
Backwards. It is very difficult for people at the beginning, and they have to trust us. There is always
trust the method as well.
Yeah, they have to trust the method.
Our experience and our strength of conviction that helps them to trust in it.
They have to trust our words, yes. That's how they trust the method. But also there are clues all along. As I say, there isn't anybody I've seen who practices who doesn't see a glimmer of light, and quite a really obvious, clear glimmer of light. They see it that first week.
Within the first few days.
Yeah, and sometimes even on the first day. Sometimes even, certainly by third day, everyone sees it. And I just love watching students on the Friday, when you've got a row of them. You remember them on the Monday. And, I used to say to them on the Monday, I used to say, you're all miserable and, and unhappy with your lives, and that's why you're here. I guarantee you, on Friday, if you do the work, I'll see a row of smiley faces in front of me. And it never failed. And if it did fail, it's because the person didn't do the work. It was 2 + 2 = 4. Do the work, Friday you'll be smiling. Unless on Friday they were having a cleanse. That is a caveat. Yeah. Sometimes they're having a cleanse on Friday. But at least even then they would know that it was, by then they would know it was part of a process. So even though they might be, oh my God, there'd be a glimmer in their eye, a glint in their eye of, I know what's going on.
Well, they had a good day the day before.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, yeah.
It's a very interesting process.
It's not something you could anticipate. I mean, that's the strange thing about it. Most things in our lives, we've had a taste of them before.
Completely counterintuitive and quirky.
Yeah, exactly. If you fall over, it hurts. If you fall over hard enough, you break a bone. All those things, you know. But the idea that you could hold your breath and transform your health physically and mentally and emotionally, there's nothing that prepares you for that. It's like a secret hidden in the universe that has to be revealed. My father told me once, we were driving somewhere. He said when he was 17 and first joined the Fleet Air Arm, which is the Naval Air Service. This was 1942 in the war. He said, I could hold my breath in those days for 2.5 minutes. And I was like, oh, really? It didn't mean anything to me because I was young at the time and healthy. But years later, I realized that was a 17-year-old young man. Now, he held his breath on an in-breath, which, I suppose, well, I don't know, but Vladimir said to me, 2.5 minutes. I think without training, he probably held it on an in-breath. Yeah. But still, it meant that his breath control was superb.
Yeah.
And Yeah, and my father said I was so much healthier and more energetic, and he believed it's because all of his comrades, or whatever you want to call them, his fellow servicemen were all smokers, and he never smoked. He thought it was that. But I look back now and realize he was just very healthy at that time. He had very good breathing. But of course, the man I knew who'd been very heavily poisoned with years of spraying, this was the man who came back from the fields with yellow skin from being covered in insecticide, herbicide, fungicide, day after day. He did all the spraying at one time on the farm with no cabs, no protective gear, no mask, none of that stuff. You know, he was a very heavy breather. And at night, the house would almost shake with his snoring. You know, someone who is snoring heavily has very poor breathing. And of course, it's not helped by the fact that my father was overweight and sleeping on his back. And of course, we teach Potato students, our students, to sleep on the side and to restrict their eating. This endless desire for food, to somehow cheer yourself up, to make yourself feel better. That's also low control pause. It's all connected. It's all a circle. Heavy breathing, overeating, not exercising, lethargy, anxiety, depression, laziness, all of these things. Snoring. It's all tied in. And where do you break into this circle? And a lot of people make the mistake of thinking, I've got to reduce my food intake or something like that. Or they go to the doctor and get on a CPAP machine to stop them snoring and to make them breathe through the night so they don't, wake up in this sort of this sleep apnea thing, which, by the way, I had terribly when I was first poisoned. I remember Vladimir was talking about he would be frightened to go to sleep. I remember that. That was one of the early symptoms after I was poisoned, is I could feel myself, and I'd never been like that before I was poisoned.
Yeah.
And I knew on some deep level that I could die breathing like that while I'm asleep, because at least when I'm awake, I can keep breathing. I can, keep something going in. But the danger was I'd fall asleep and breathe deeper. And at a certain point, I'd have some cardiac arrest or something. I knew it. I knew that it was dangerous for me to sleep. I mean, that very acute, super heavy breathing did subside of its own accord. But I do remember those first few months thinking, I am going to suffocate. That's it. Even though I was breathing buckets of air, the experience was one of suffocation. And this is the funny thing, again, one of the ironies of the potato method, we invite people to self-suffocate, to suffocate themselves in order to get rid of the experience of suffocation.
Yeah, and we invite people to make an apnea.
Yeah, exactly. Or to have what is effectively an asthma attack. Give yourself a fake asthma attack by holding your breath, stopping breathing, and then you'll get rid of asthma. If you give yourself apnea by stopping yourself breathing, you'll stop having apnea. I mean, yeah, it's counterintuitive. It seems, it's not comprehensible to anybody who hasn't done it, which partly explains, I think, why so few doctors have taken, or medical scientists have taken it seriously, because they do everything intellectually. Well, if it doesn't make rational sense and it doesn't fit with what's written in the paperwork, then it can't be true. But if a doctor or a nurse or anyone does the method, then they get it. They have to do it to get it. If you'd explain to me what I've explained 15 years ago, I'd have gone.
I saw a booklet on this in 1998. I took one look at it and I thought, not doing that.
Yeah.
That's awful. I'm not interested in that. And I had asthma at the time and migraine headache, really bad.
Yeah.
That's why somebody gave me the booklet.
Right.
It got introduced, I suppose, 9 years later.
Yeah.
Again.
Maybe if I'd only read about it, I'd have had the same response. I don't know. I was lucky that Elizabeth,
Yes, she talked to you about it and said it was
Yeah,
remarkable.
there was a human being here who clearly wasn't trying to sell me anything, and just told me her story. And the human element allowed me to trust it. And I just thought, well, she wouldn't make that up. She wouldn't tell me that she was chronically fatigued and couldn't do anything, and now she can do anything and go out with her friends at the weekend, because she was very young. She was one of those people, I think, who reversed the thing completely, because I don't know how old she was, probably early 20s or something, very young. And she said, I can go out on an evening now and do what everybody else of my age is doing, and I couldn't before. And I thought, well, she wouldn't make that up. I was convinced by her.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was convinced by the person who told me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'd known him a long time and I knew he wouldn't lie to me. I knew he wouldn't lie to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was a bit cynical, I have to say.
Yeah.
I wasn't in a hurry, actually. I spent 3 months waiting and thinking about it until in the end I thought, damn it, I'm going to ring him up and find out if it works.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I did 3 maximum pauses of 30 and my brain fog lifted. I thought, blimey.
Well, yeah. 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 Yeah.
Control pause of 10. Only lasted half an hour, but I mean, it was impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I remember in the sort of week or 10 days before we did the workshop with you, I remember just seeing how long I could hold my breath. I couldn't get to 30 seconds, just holding my breath. How long can you do that?
I was with Christopher. That would have been different. You would have done it with him.
Yeah, but I just was playing around because I was waiting to start the workshop because it wasn't available. We'd spoken, and I knew from Elizabeth that you have to hold your breath. That's part of it. So I thought, let's just see. And I think I was struggling to get above 20, 25 seconds, just holding the breath. But the point was, as I was trying to, once I'm onto something, I'm onto it. I'm pretty focused. So I was doing quite a lot of just my very low quality, poor technique breath holds. But I think by the time I got to the beginner's course, I'd already moved the dial a bit. Sure. Because this is another thing I think that is really encouraging to people who are really in the hole with really bad control pauses, is you can make huge advances if you practice very quickly. So you don't even have to do it very well. And you don't have to be, because often some, students look at other students who are doing these massive pauses and they go, oh, well, and they compare themselves, but that's not the point. You compare yourself to yourself. And, if you start off with a control pause that's 10 or something, just doing any breath hold, 20 or 30 seconds will make a difference. And dramatically, and your control pause will rise from 10 or, God forbid, 5 up to 15 within days. And that means that your health is, well, I don't think it's as simple as if you go from 7, shall we say, to 14, you've doubled your health. I don't think health works like that. But you've doubled your carbon dioxide level, you've halved your hyperventilating, and you will experience it as if you have doubled your health. I don't know what doubling your health means, but you'll feel a damn sight better. I mean, dramatically better. Yeah. So all the encouragement is there. This was another thing I noticed. People who are the sickest at the beginning tend to get the best results in the end.
Yeah, they do. Because
they notice that.
They see the benefit immediately.
Yeah, exactly. And they have to be so disciplined and dedicated to get that result that discipline and dedication becomes habitual, and they keep going with it. Whereas some people who they're already pretty good anyway, and they just do a bit of practice and it picks up, they haven't had to develop that kind of that deep practice, because there's a lot of wisdom in the practice. To get good practice, you have to really work on it and craft your practice and learn all these tricks about how to get around your mind and how to get around your reluctance and this sense of suffocation and these sort of temporary, what can we say, barriers to you going forward. You have to negotiate your way around all of this, and you can learn all these tricks from practitioners, but also you learn them just from your own practice, from your own experience. But if you don't learn all that, which people who haven't got serious conditions don't have to learn it, they tend not to have very good practice in the end. And it's
Yeah.
those people, I often said to the people who are the worst off in the group, they would complain that, oh, the others are doing better than me. I used to say to them, chances are you will end up with the best practice and maybe even the best health at the end of the day, if you just keep going and compare yourself to yourself yesterday. Don't compare yourself to others. That's pointless.
Well, I think we've come to a good ending, good conversation.
Yeah.
And some very important points came out. You see, the thing is that it's creating a context.
Yeah.
Of what people go through.
Yeah, well, hopefully people at different stages might be able to hear that and, oh yeah, I can, that's where I am. I get that, that's useful or whatever, but hopefully.
Yeah, well, I used to sit in my back room looking at my garden and spending time how to persuade myself to do the next pause.
Yeah.
And then I just get going, and when the kids would open the door and go, Mum.
I remember Lucas coming to stay when he was still very small, and I'd started practicing, and he thought it was hilarious. As I got up to do my steps, he'd grab hold of one of my legs and just hold on to me. So I'd be doing a pause while I was dragging a 4-year-old child through. He would be giggling like mad, and then eventually he'd let go and then do another one. He'd grab the other leg. Or he'd stand in front of me, so I'd have to kind of go around him or under him or over him. Yes, you will have to do it forever if you want to maintain your good health. But the point is you won't mind.